Hello and welcome to another episode of Rerouting Logistics, hosted by Beverley Bell. And today we're joined by two special guests, Peter Gibbs, who's the CEO of Ainscough Crane Hire, and John Moran, who's the CEO of Flannery's. Over to you, Beverley.
Good morning, John and Peter. It's lovely to see you. Thank you very much indeed for coming here to take part in this podcast in sunny Liverpool. You've got the right colour tie on, Peter. I'm glad to see.
Well, thanks, Beverley.
You're hedging your bets with not wearing a tie.
Absolutely.
Very, very wise. So, John Moran from Flannery Plant Hire in Wembley. Tell us a little bit about your journey from St James's Catholic High School to being a director of Flannery Plant Hire in a moment. And then Peter Gibbs, again, tell us a little bit about your journey from Seaford College to being Chief Executive Officer of Ainscough Crane Hire. After that, we're going to have a much more general and very informal chat. So, John, we'll start with you.
So my journey from St James's Catholic High School, I would have to say I wasn't probably the greatest pupil. I bounced along, probably did enough, but wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Apart from I knew when I left school in them days, which was probably a long time ago, I wanted a decent apprenticeship under my belt. I went into construction plant because my father was in it. I already knew a fair bit about it, and I quite enjoyed it. I was handy with my hands, if you like. So I went there, did that, passed my apprenticeship. I got a job with the company that put me through my apprenticeship. Unfortunately, St Mary's Crane Hire, St Mary's Plant Hire, they went into receivership. I joined another company, and through that company, then I then started out on my own, just to try and see it, see if I could make it. That turned into 18 years.
Oh, wow.
So I did it for 18 years, again in the servicing trucks and vans was our bread and butter. I then decided to join the vehicle inspectorate.
Well, we all make mistakes, John, but never mind, you got over it.
Well, to be fair, I went in there with a plan, and the plan was to find out about how they did the testing and everything. And then once I had that under my belt after 6 months, I was going to go and back in the truck business again. But that managed to turn into 13 odd years with vehicle inspectorate. Then they were VOSA, then they were DVSA. I did that, finished up enforcement manager in London, and then joined Flannery's in 2016 as the transport manager, and then worked my way up through and was promoted through Flannery's to transport director and director on the board.
And here you are now, and you talked about apprenticeships a moment ago.
Yeah.
Apprenticeships are very popular,
Yeah.
and it's a very good way to get young people into the world of work. We did a little poll before, didn't we, to work out our average age, which is about 63.
Correct.
How would you engage with somebody who's 13 or 23? Would you say, yes, look at apprenticeships, it's as good for you today as it was then?
Yeah, so we actually run our own apprenticeship scheme. We call it Skills Hub or Boot Camp, and we take people who had no previous experience to be machine drivers. And so far, we believe we've done about 900 have been through the boot camp.
Wow.
And successfully continued working.
Why have you called it boot camp?
I can't, probably to do with hard boots and marketing and building sites.
Because to me, as a mere girl, boot camp terrifies me. Skills Hub excites me.
Well,
so the language is really interesting, isn't it, in terms of who you're aiming at?
We would call it the Skills Hub,
but that might not attract the people that you want to recruit into your industry.
So we actually do a lot of engagement with schools. We attend schools, and we've run a number of workshops. On Saturdays, we invite people in, youngsters in, school leavers, and of course we've got a range of simulators, so they can actually get their hands on, and they'll pick up very quickly. And of course, the beauty of that generation now is they're used to that technology to operate everything from Xbox and all them sort of machines. So it actually falls very naturally into them. There is definitely a market there.
We might come back to that when we talk about what the future might hold in, say, 2075.
Yeah.
Can I have a go on one of the simulators?
Of course you can, Beverley. We can arrange that.
Thank you. Yeah. Don't film it, though, because I'll probably crash everything.
Of course we'll film it. You'll be fine.
Oh, no, thank you. OK, so Peter, tell us about your journey from Seaford College in deepest, darkest Sussex to being CEO of Ainscough's.
Yeah, so it's a very long time since anyone's mentioned Seaford College to me, and probably not dissimilar, John, to you. I sort of got by in those early years at school. Very sporty school, small school. The academics was not my forte, so I didn't even stay on and do A-levels. Rather than an apprenticeship, I had itchy feet. So I went travelling, and the aim was to go travelling for a few months. I actually ended up travelling for nearly 3 years, and I think that's when I sort of really grew up.
That's pre-internet, of course, isn't it?
Pre-internet, yeah, no phones. We used to have a methodology when you change country, you'd phone home on a reverse charge call.
Yes.
And we used the name of the dog if everything was okay. And then the family wouldn't pick the phone up. But you'd hear from the operator, they'd be saying, oh, the family's all fine back here, and yes, we've moved house, but no, we don't know who Mr. Jason is, so no, we're not taking the call. They knew what country and what city you'd moved to.
Oh, clever.
I did that for 3 years, and I got into the travel, and I got into work, all sorts of different jobs. So I came back, and you talked to our age earlier, so in that generation there was a bit. My father worked in London, and I got a job in London. I got bored very quickly. So joined the army. And
how old were you when you joined the army?
I was then in late 20s. So actually I was older than probably many of my cohort for that, but I've been travelling for nearly 3 years.
What did you do in the army when you started?
So I joined as an officer. I went to Sandhurst. I joined the Irish Guards.
Back to boot camp.
That definitely was a bit of boot camp. Actually, that boot camp sort of went further. So whilst I joined the Guards, I went to Germany, and I preferred the mud to dressing up in a tunic. So I then went and did a number of years in one of the divisions of Special Forces. And I think when they felt I was getting a bit too fat and broken to be effective at that, they put me in a helicopter. So I then flew for 10 years. Loved it. And that definitely, I feel like I'm back in that space now. There's sort of a crane business, expensive equipment, and it's got to turn up on time, all of that, and how you manage that and manage the people and the servicing to the crew. Actually, there's a lot of similarities, I think.
So how old were you when you left the army?
So I left at 37, married, 3 children at that stage, and by then my wife had decided it was time for me to grow up and get a proper job. I think it's the way she phrased it. And that was a big decision, because I could have gone flying. Obviously, I had many thousands of hours under my belt. Or you could have gone into military consultancy, because that was 2000. So by that stage, we're already in a world that had changed, and lots of military activity going on around the world. But actually, I wanted to sort of carry on the leadership journey and in management, in organisations. So I went into logistics, really, and into food service. And probably then, John, you did your apprenticeship from there. The other part of my apprenticeship was I went from being effectively an acting a lieutenant colonel all the way down to being a project manager, sat in an office with a number of youngsters and having to earn your boots in a new industry and quietly work your way up.
So if you were speaking to a 13-year-old or a 23-year-old, would you say go into the army, it'll be good for you?
If that... I say to everybody, what's your vision, what's your dream, and go for it and shoot for the stars. Always shoot for the stars. And, it doesn't matter where you land. It's all about the journey. And if that's one thing I learned from traveling, that was you found yourself in places doing things and with opportunities, and you kept on finding, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. And if I'm honest, I never learned that, or I don't recall learning that at school. I learned that through experience. And I would say that to a youngster, go shoot for something if it's interesting. If it gets you up in the morning, go for it. And a bit of grit, work hard, enjoy the ride.
Okay. So in terms of apprenticeships, which we talked about with John a moment ago, what does Ainscough do in that space? What do you do to attract young people?
Yes, similarly. So we do the formal side of it through the apprenticeships. We put a huge amount of effort into that over the last few years. And for a crane business, we are the biggest crane business in the country.
Is it successful? Is the apprenticeship program successful?
It's mixed. So we've become more flexible with it. So we've been successful at getting people in, and who doesn't like a crane? But even so, bringing youngsters in and keeping that engagement and keeping them into it, it's quite a cultural shock. So what we've also done, we've extended a version of the apprentice program to suit the applicant. So again, all of our colleagues need to have HGV. So typically they'll be a little bit older than you might have an apprentice coming in at 16, 17. So we've adapted that to reflect someone who's maybe already got 2-3 years of work experience, so they just need to do the HGV bit. How we get them employed and working actively out with the customer as soon as possible, because again, that's earning money, and that's people building stuff and doing stuff, and that's where you'll find if that individual enjoys the job, likes it, and is likely to stick long term. And the experience, so through apprenticeship experience, ours is actually, it's just over a 50% retention rate after 2 years, which is why we've become more flexible.
It's challenging work, and the work both of you do is very challenging. It's hard graft.
Yeah, it is.
It's not naturally a place where ladies of a certain age wearing their Jimmy Choos would say, I'll go and work there. How do you attract them? John, what do you do?
So with our skill set, we've had 900 people successfully through it and passed. And about 5% is female ladies. How do we attract them? We really make every effort to attract them. It's a great career. There's no barriers from our side. Obviously, we're the largest plant hire company in the UK, and all we want is people who can come in, work, do the job safely and cheerfully, if I'm honest, and deliver to our clients.
Okay. What about you? Do you have any lady crane operatives?
We do. We have, it's not many, and we'd like more because, frankly, it's you're operating a crane. So there's no gender bias to doing the job at all. So it's very much, as John said, it's about actually getting people to say this could be a really interesting career path for you. So we do all the career fairs with that. We do open days, so we get people to come and sit in a crane, and you'll soon see somebody thinks, actually, I can see this. And again, as with yourself, we're an industry where we build stuff, we make stuff. So from some of the businesses I've been in on the journey, I just think it's an amazing place to be. If you want to do something where you get up in the morning and you can find yourself doing a job that you really enjoy, it pays the bills, you're looked after right, you're doing it safe, you've got the right kit, and you're making stuff. You go out with our colleagues and you go down the road and you'll get all the, I built that. There's an industry that's making communities. If you can get young people involved in that and seeing that. So there's the social media side of that as well. So you've got to, and you need your youngsters to be posting.
Definitely.
So I'm learning to pick up on posts that they're doing and repost those or comment on their posts and support that and trying to get your other directors and stuff to do that.
It does work.
The big thing is social media, but also from our point of view, the simulators help, because if you show someone a 50-ton excavator sitting in a field, they'll go, I'll never be able to drive that. But if you get them in the simulator and go, this is that machine, within about 5 minutes, they're like, actually, I can do this. And they get self-confidence, and that's a big door opener.
Yes, and we've had an election recently, and we know that the Labour government has committed to construction. So that's good for you, but it also brings its challenges. I'll ask you first, John, what do you think of one of the main challenges in the construction sector, which obviously you support with what you do?
So again, one of the main challenges I see going along, we're bobbing along at the moment, but if the supposed building boom comes, there will be a shortage of trained operators, drivers and general people in general, which we will need to work out how we fill that skills gap.
Pre-Brexit, did you rely on people from Europe?
Or? Yeah, we had obviously from all over Europe,
okay,
working for us. And after Brexit, I did lose some good people who, for one reason or another, decided to move back to Poland or Romania.
Okay, and what about you, Peter, in the work that you do in terms of construction support and challenges with regard to what's coming?
So in terms of the biggest risk, it's exactly the same as John's just called out. It's about the availability of competent labour. So if growth comes into the UK, that will be a real issue. We see it already today. We help customers out with it because you have different types of crane hire where we can provide more of the labour, more of the planning, more of the support. And we are doing more and more of that. And that's driven by the fact that the customer typically doesn't have their own depth of labour or depth of competency in that marketplace. So all the more focus on training and bringing people in. And that's a combination of Brexit, which you mentioned, COVID, a lot of people retired during COVID. And even prior to that, I think the reality is a bit of an aged workforce as well. So this whole subject around how do you recruit, train and retain young people and bring them into the industry is definitely a key question.
So we've got about 2,000 machine drivers out to work today, and about 100 of them are ladies. So again, it's I guess it's looking at other markets and other areas, which is where social media comes into it. It's showcasing or putting in the window what we actually do and what day one looks like.
And they will be the best ambassadors. The young people will be the best ambassadors for the business and for the sector. Let's just take a moment to talk about safety, because obviously safety is very dear to my heart. But I'm not going to talk about HGV safety because that's a very boring subject. I want to talk about enforcement. Now, you used to work in the DVSA.
I did indeed, yeah.
You were lovely to deal with.
Yes,
yes.
The
perfect.
Thank you for saying that.
The perfect enforcement officer.
So is that poacher term gamekeeper or gamekeeper term poacher?
Yeah, I always looked at it as a stick and carrot. You'd often get more out of people.
Yes.
Sometimes people just need to sit down and guidance.
Yes.
And explain to them what you were looking for.
Yes.
How to do it right. And you didn't need the stick. You didn't need the enforcement. You needed the education.
Yeah, but that's changed a lot since you were in post. But just generally on enforcement, traffic commissioners talk about fair competition and they talk about road safety. They talk about a level playing field. Let's not talk about TCs. Let's talk about police officers. Let's talk about health and safety advisors. All those things that goes unseen by the great British public. They have no concept really of what happens. They might sometimes see massive great things going down the motorway, don't give it any thought. I saw some police escorted abnormal loads last night when I was travelling down. What's your view on enforcement? I'll ask you first, John, because you were an enforcement officer. What's your view on the fairness of enforcement at the present time? And then I'll ask Peter.
Well, I have to say, as an operator, it's skewed completely the other way at the moment from certain police forces in the UK. Others are still excellent, and you can communicate, you can work with them, you talk to them. But others are no, almost the computer says no, and it's very challenging in certain areas that are linked up. So yeah, we're having a very hard time with it at the moment.
Because the police do have a discretion as to how to enforce, don't they? I mean, the legislation is written clearly, but that discretion is also written into the legislation.
Yes.
Are you saying that they're not exercising their discretion
They're
properly?
not exercising their discretion at all. They are, and a classic example with this, I was trying to move a machine from the docks across to the Midlands, but I was told I couldn't move it because it was a bank holiday in Scotland.
Excellent.
On a Friday in England. So I obviously phoned Highway Scotland, who, when they'd finished falling off the chair laughing, said, I said, well, can I have permission to move my load in England? And they went, no, it's not in your jurisdiction, in our jurisdiction. We're nowhere near it. And they clearly thought I was on drugs or something. So,
did you eventually get your?
No, I couldn't move the machine until 9 o'clock on the Tuesday morning.
Technical term, bonkers.
Well, absolutely, yeah. It made no sense, no logic at all. We're 250, 300 miles from Scotland. So yeah, that is happening. That's just one example, but that's happening all the time, day in, day out. Police escorts is another one. I haven't needed a police escort for the wide loads for the last 3 years. Now suddenly I need one on the same job, in the same area, every time we move. £2,500 a time for the police escort. But they can't tell me where they can do it. It might be 2 weeks, it might be 3 weeks. Whereas my client is looking for the excavator to start work on Monday morning.
And the cost to GB PLC is huge.
Is over £540 million a year, I think. The RHA have done a piece on it. Yeah, it's colossal, but yeah.
So, Peter, John's got strong views. Have you got strong views?
Yeah, very similar. And it's a subject John and I are joined at the hip on.
And absolutely.
And we're being dragged into that space to look to try and get consistency. So the question was around police enforcement. If I'm right, I think you said, is it 48 police authorities around the country? I think the reality is this is 2080. Most are following a custom and practice that feels to me, and I'm the new boy in the industry, to have been pretty well developed and have worked. But what's happened is there's a number of different viewpoints that have come in a number of key areas. It's not credible, it's not viable, It's not commercial. I mean, it is causing a real dent to us and to our customers.
But the police officers would say that doesn't bother them. What they're bothered about is road safety.
And so you cut before I said, and foremost, it's not safe. So the battle, and where I'm getting involved in here, is beyond all of that. Obviously, I've got to run a commercially viable business.
Of course.
But actually, that 20% are creating an activity. You just alluded to. They're routing people 50, 100 miles out of their way. They're putting time on the road. So the very hazard that they're trying to take off the road, they're putting on the road for longer hours, longer distances. They're creating risk, not reducing risk, and that's all through lack of consistency of application.
Yeah, and absolutely. And we have a permit to move, which traditionally would last for 30 days. So there's one depot would generate about 300 a month. Now they're saying, oh no, we want them every 10 days. So now that's 900 a month. And if we're 10% of the movement orders in the north of England, so it's thousands. So who's got the time to sit down and read these thousands of movement orders? Between the two of us, we're probably 25-30% of movement orders in the country. So no one's got the time to sit down and read every movement order. So it's actually defeating the objective. It's making the roads less safe.
And invariably, as with any industry, you hopefully have most participants work hard to comply and work to the right standard, the right safe standard. And certainly our organisations do, and I'd like to think both of us, that's our connection together, lead in that journey. The reality is there are organisations that don't. So actually one of the consequences of this, so where we've had lifts that we can't complete because we haven't had the clearances and the support, we won't go. The lift takes place. So by definition, what's happened is the end customer's gone to somebody else who is not following any of that compliance structure. So as well as routing us further and creating risk there, they're also creating risk by pushing activity into perhaps parts of the industry who won't be working to those same standards.
And that's the same problem. I have my sales team going, we've lost the hire for this 50-ton excavator.
Yeah.
Someone else has got the excavator in there without the movement order. So, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a real concern.
Yeah.
It is a real concern. Okay, so we've talked a bit about legislation. So if each of you were appointed Transport Minister for 2 days, what change would you make to legislation on day one, and what change would you make to policy on day two? Let's start with you, Peter.
Well, day one's easy for me. So my real drive at the moment, and the shocker to me when I joined this business, because I come from outside the industry, is that cranes don't have to comply with the same regulation as HGVs do, so they're exempt from the Traffic Commissioner. Now, whilst you want business to be able to work, you need to have a consistency and you need to have a regulator to ensure that consistency. We don't. That creates a hazard on the road that the public, the politicians, and no one should be accepting. So day one, I would remove that exemption. That is in the minister's gift. The second half of your question is what would I do then around legislation?
No, policy.
Around policy. So policy for me would be to get back into the STGO regulations that we've really just been talking around, and whether that's lead times for booking, whether that's load security, whether that's escorting. All of this needs a real work through and clarity brought to it if UK PLC is going to deliver the sort of infrastructure growth that it wants to.
Okay, thank you. John, you get to be Transport Minister for 2 days.
Right, so in my previous role at DVSA, unfortunately, part of it was I attended a number of fatal accident investigations and were involved in them. So I would make cycle education for kids in schools compulsory. I would also, if you're buying a new bicycle from the shop or a bike from the shop, that is part of it as well, to just give people a greater awareness of their surroundings.
Would you also make lorry drivers do that same training?
So I do make lorry drivers do it.
I know you do, but if you were minister?
Yes, I would add that in. So the lorry drivers need 5 lots of 7-hour CPC. Let's make one of them safe. It's safe urban cycling, but the name needs to change because you could be in the country lanes, you're just as much risk. Yeah, I would add that in as a compulsory module. Yeah. And we do that for all our own of our own HGV drivers, yeah.
Okay. And policy, a policy change?
And policy, that's really easy. I would take the STGO regulations from the 48 police forces and try and work your way through that lot. So they're all singing from the same hymn sheet to try and give us a bit of consistency across the UK, consistency on enforcement, and how we will be dealt with. I want to be dealt with the same in London as it would be in Merseyside. Yeah.
Before we sort of wrap up, let's look into the future. Let's look forward 50 years, 2074, 2075. What's the future going to look like in the crane sector, do you think, Peter?
So the physics isn't going to change, or at least no one's come up with anything that you look to do that yet. So I think the requirement to dig, to lift, to stick things together is always going to be there. Clearly, the technology in that period of time will have revolutionised significantly. So I would be surprised if you had a crane operator in the crane at point of lift. I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't even a crane operator taking the crane to the lift and to the lift site. So that could potentially be remote. On the lift itself, you probably have more technology doing the solution, less labour involved. So it would be around how that oversight interacts and does that safely. If you roll that back and come back to today, we're already getting a lot better data and being able to use the data to engage with the customer around efficiency, around safety, of the checks happening. So that's all the on time in full, do it right first time, do it right every time. So we're getting a lot of benefits even now. So we're not out there with the AI, but we are getting that for remote workers to be able to really keep the operator safe and make sure we get best use out of the equipment. Okay, thank you. And John, what about in your sector?
Yeah, I mean, in 50 years' time, they'll still need to shift muck and dig holes and build. But yeah, you can already see it coming. So we're heavily into live data now, probably on that journey for the last 5 years. So we can tell you how much muck it's moved, fuel consumption, idling time, which we share with our clients. And I can see it's not going to be a great leap of faith to automate the machine. Certainly excavators, or it could be done remotely. And I see artificial intelligence playing a bigger part of that. We're not there yet, but yeah.
I don't know whether it's scary or whether it's exciting, or maybe a bit of both.
Yeah, I think it is exciting. I think it will be. There'll still be the role for people, but they may not be sitting in the excavator. They might be sitting somewhere else, operating it.
In my last job in the military, I ran what's called aviation standards. So that was the instructors of the instructors, but you were also responsible for new programs. And the Apache turned up. So I was responsible for bringing into service, part of that time window, the Apache. And it's exactly the same challenge we're talking about here now. We'd gone from I'd learnt to fly with a map. Yeah, there were no mobile phones there, so your 7 radio channels, and you went in it and you had your 1,000 buttons and you did all of that, to something now where you had a cassette, you plugged the thing in, it effectively operated the system for you. And you had to learn to think completely differently around what are you trying to do with this bit of equipment, and therefore what is it you're teaching someone to do and how do you do it, and basically keep it safe. I think we've got that kind of journey. To go through.
Okay. So we started by talking about when you were at school and all that sort of stuff. So take you right back. You've both obviously achieved exceptionally well. 2 questions from that. If you were going for a job interview, what advice would your mother give you, John?
My mother would give me I can tell you exactly what advice. Relax and be yourself and go for it.
Okay, very wise advice. Peter?
It would be similar. Turn up on time, be smart, be confident, be yourself.
Yeah, be yourself is being authentic, isn't it? And so what does the future hold for both of you? What do you fancy doing next? What's your next challenge, John?
So obviously my kids keep talking to me. I'm at that age now about retirement. I have got absolutely no intention of retiring.
Excellent.
I intend to keep pushing. I really want to try and make the road safer and help the haulage industry as well. So that is going to be my burning ambition, and I am going to do it.
Excellent, thank you. Peter?
Yeah, at the beginning of the podcast, you asked all the way back at school, what is it you wanted to do? And at that time, I didn't know, much like yourself, John. I do now. I love what I do. I'm lucky. I love the role I have. I have the ability to influence. So I'm not going anywhere. I don't know if that will disappoint people in Ainscough, but certainly not for a while. I chair the Crane Interest Group as well, which is the body that represents the industry. And as we've discussed in the last half hour, there's lots of opportunity for us in a very positive way to move my subsector, the crane industry and the construction industry, forward. So certainly for the next few years, that's my focus.
Well, I would say a couple of industry leaders, but the young people would say a couple of influencers. That's what you both are.